Dun, dun, dun. All right. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Pathways. Today, I'm honored to be in the presence of His Excellency, Mr. Chan Seng, the CEO of Teach for Malaysia. It's an absolute pleasure to have you right here. Wow, I almost made a mistake right there. I almost said Chan Chun Sing, but I realized that that's the Education Minister of Singapore.
Yeah.
Well, Sun Seng, thank you so much for being here, and it's wonderful work that you are doing for the people of Malaysia and this world at large as well.
Thanks for having me, Victor. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're currently in the office of Teach for Malaysia at the moment, and there's a whole bunch of history that's kind of like associated with that. I asked ChatGPT, what are some of the most prominent educational NGOs in Malaysia? Teach for Malaysia comes up right on top right here.
I think we've just gamed the SEO system. Might not be true.
You are one of Malaysia's most prominent educational NGOs. Congratulations on the great things that you've done for Malaysia and at large. But I guess also people might not be super familiar with what I guess Teach for Malaysia is and how it kind of like plays into a wider framework right there.
Yeah.
What is Teach for Malaysia? What do you do?
Yeah. So I think ultimately at the end of the day, our vision is to see a Malaysia where every child, no matter their background, every child has the opportunity to realize their potential because they've received the kind of education that will enable them to do so. And, we believe that every Malaysian deserves to live the life that they truly love. I think that's a life where you have discovered what you care about in the world, a life where you discover your purpose, a life where you have agency and choice to choose the kind of career, the kind of way in which you want to live your life. And education plays such a key role in that, right? But so many Malaysians don't actually have access to the kind of education that will give them the kind of choice, agency, and self-discovery in life. And oftentimes that is due to the privilege of where someone is born, right? What kind of socioeconomic background they're born into, whether they're born into a rural or an urban part of the country, right? And there's so many sort of dimensions of privilege that enable or disable a child from getting the kind of education that will set them up for a life that they love. And so we want to work towards a Malaysia where every kid, no matter their background, has the access to the kind of education that will enable them to thrive in society and to be leaders of Malaysia and leaders of their own lives. So how we do that is we are trying to build a movement of leaders across the education ecosystem that will, in the immediate term, support students to be on these life trajectories that they aspire towards, and then in the longer term think about how the system as a whole is transforming in order to make sure that it is supporting every child to thrive. And how we primarily do that is through our fellowship program, where we are calling on our most promising and diverse young Malaysians, or not so young Malaysians, to spend 2 years full-time in a high-needs school in Malaysia. And throughout those 2 years, their primary focus is on supporting kids in the classroom, supporting transformational learning outcomes for kids in the classroom, while also thinking about the context and the community that they're in, and thinking about what kind of innovations or solutions could they work alongside their communities to start that will help kids to improve their educational outcomes. So the fellowship is a 2-year program that focuses on those two things. And beyond the fellowship, we then want our alumni to continue into different positions of influence that will enable them to work towards supporting the ultimate goal of system transformation.
Wow.
So that's the kind of nutshell, and we do more beyond that, but that's the main focus.
Okay, wonderful. Well, if I could ask then, what led you to this particular calling right here? What led you to teach for Malaysia? Was it a calling? Was it fate? Or was it, I don't know, like what eventually led you?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I never grew up with an aspiration to be a teacher. In fact, growing up, I always used to think that teaching was probably the worst job that I could do. But over time, as I grew older, I began to realize that actually, you know, I really enjoy working with young people. And I grew up in a relatively privileged background. I grew up going to a really prominent international school in Malaysia. But in the 1997 Asian financial crisis, my father lost his job, and eventually my parents then spent all of their life savings on my sister and my education, but that still wasn't enough, and we had to drop out of school. And so I dropped out of this school in Form 3, Year 9, and homeschooled, and then went on to university and all of that stuff, right? But I guess kind of being forced to drop out of school at, well, how old was I? 11 years old, I think, at the time. Just kind of developed this kind of sense of injustice in me, right? Because I was asking the question of why was my education sort of predicated on whether my parents had money or not, right? And so when I was 15 years old, my younger brother was born. So we have this big 15-year gap, right? And when I graduated from university, my brother had just started going to school. And, you know, he couldn't go to a school like I went to, and he went through the public school system. And I remember kind of comparing his education to the kind of education that I received. And that's not to say that all international schools are good or whatever. There are some great ones and some not so good ones. And, you know, there's obviously things that, you know, different value systems that we might prefer in either stream, right? But I think the things that I saw about his experience were just wildly different from what I experienced in school, and felt very, very frustrated that he wasn't receiving the kind of education that I had hoped for him. So I heard about Teach from Malaysia. I was 1 year out of university. I was working as a management trainee in a financial services firm. And I figured, you know, I'm so frustrated with the things that I'm seeing in my brother's education. Why don't I do something about it, right? So I figured I would
become CEO of TFM.
No, absolutely not. I figured
well, it happened. It happened.
That was definitely not the plan, but I figured to ease my conscience, right, as a complaining Malaysian, as you know, so many of us are, I would, you know, do something about the things that I was frustrated about, right? And I figured I would do 2 years. I would contribute to, you know, improving education outcomes for kids in high need schools, and I would go back to a corporate job after having done my part for 2 years, right? That obviously didn't happen, and 12 years later, here I am still at Teach from Malaysia. And I think that my 2-year experience in school just completely transformed a lot of how I understood Malaysia, but also how I understood humanity, or just my belief of what I felt my life should contribute or work towards. After I finished my 2 years as a fellow, I said I would do 2 more years at TFM, coaching new fellows, and those 2 more years became another 2 more years.
And here we are.
Yeah.
Wow. And if you think about it, it is in fact no small feat what you guys have done. You serve underserved children right here. Your aspirational vision highlights that by 2030, you will be a movement of 30,000 leaders to serve collectively to enable children from all parts of the country to realize their potential. And it's cool because we have somebody who basically was involved in the fellowship program himself and then went on, I guess, to carry on. But what was, I guess, pushing you towards continuing along the way? Was it that made it so that it was so hard to leave, that made it so that you ended up continuing even though there was a part of you that felt, maybe I need to leave?
Yeah, there's always two things that I say that have kind of kept me in this work. Number one is the frustrations of the realities that we are facing on the ground. And on the flip side of that, the other thing that kind of fuels me is that seeing evidence of the possibilities of what could happen if we just channel our efforts in different ways towards helping students to different outcomes in life. When I first started teaching, I thought that, I was going to go into a school and support kids like my brother. And the reality is that my brother already has was born into a certain set of privileges, right? The fact that he had a family that could put food on the table, the fact that he had a family that could read and write, right? The fact that he had a family, and in our context, that could speak English meant that he had a certain set of privileges, and a family of people who had graduated from university meant that he had already been set up with the belief that if he wanted to go to university in life, he would be able to do so. And so I thought that my brother was already scraping the bottom of the barrel, to be honest, with his education experience. But the school that I was placed in was, at the time when we used to have the banding system, was ranked in the bottom 100 of secondary schools in the country.
Wow.
And I was a Form 4 English teacher, and I had kids in some of my classes who couldn't read and write in any language whatsoever.
Wow.
And I was teaching letters of the alphabet to 16 and 17-year-old kids.
Wow, that's insane.
And that blew my mind, right? Because first off, I just did not imagine that would be a possibility for kids who had spent 9 years in school, right? And then the second thing was, like, as someone who has been able to read and write, for the majority of my conscious life, what is life like, right? Not knowing how to read and write at 16 and 17 years old.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Right.
I mean, like, what you said is absolutely right. I mean, like, if you've been in school for like 9 years by that point, right, then you kind of have to ask the question, right? Like, what were they even doing during that time right there? I mean, like, because you could have had a situation where, you weren't in school and then you weren't able to read and write. And I think that would be more, shall we say, reasonable right there. But if you think about it, if you're in school, then you're in a system, and then somehow that system is not working. You find yourself in an environment that is designed for that. But somehow or another, either it never occurred to you by dint of your internal motivation or external motivation, or somehow there wasn't any sort of push from within society that caused your natural survival instinct to kick in and therefore start pursuing an education. And it's shocking what you say right there.
Yeah.
How was that possible?
So I think that when we think about the challenges in education, they're intersectional, right? There's so many dimensions that factor into it, right? And, when I was talking about my brother and the privileges that he had, I'm alluding to some of those factors, right? So you imagine you're born into a family with illiterate parents, right? With parents who had not gone to university, maybe not even finished secondary school, right? And them doing the best that they can, they have sent you to school. They might not have been able to afford sending you to kindergarten. So a lot of our kids may have rocked up to standard 1, not knowing their ABCs in standard 1, right? But actually, most Malaysian kids do know their ABCs by standard 1. They would have gone to kindergarten. If you had literate parents, you would, right? And so on day 1 of standard 1, they're already behind. Right, and then the school that I taught in had about 2,500 students, right, and average class sizes 37. I had class sizes of 42, which is the maximum number you're supposed to have in a school legally, but it can go up. And you have one teacher teaching 42 kids in the classroom, right? And so when you have that kind of ratio, and to be nuanced, that's not the reality in all schools in Malaysia, right? There are many schools where you have very, very small teacher ratios, but in urban overpopulated schools, that's a common reality. So my kids would have been in a class size of like 40 to one teacher, and the majority of the kids in the class probably did their ABCs, right? Knew their ABCs. So the teacher is catering to the majority capability in the class, but isn't necessarily able to meet the needs of every single student in that classroom, right? And then because we have an automatic promotion system in Malaysia, we haven't allocated our resources to be able to provide effective remedial support. What happens is a kid goes up to the next level, and then they just continue on, right? And then everything just compounds. And so they just keep on going up from one level to the next level, and they they just figure out how to survive in the system. So all of my kids had exercise books. And if I opened their exercise books, they were filled with words because they had copied it off the whiteboard and learned how to draw basically these letters into their whiteboard, but they could not read it to you. So they had learned how to cope in the system.
The bare minimum, basically, like the appearance of education, but not really the actual thing. I think Robert Kwok would have said that is what happens when you have form, but you do not have the substance.
Yep.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. I think then one of the biggest challenges is that a lot of our system incentivizes for the form over the substance. I think I used to have, before I became a fellow, I had this very erroneous belief that, our teachers aren't good. And after having taught in school, what I've seen is that we have some of the most dedicated people in our classrooms in Malaysia. That's not everybody, right? To be fair, right? It's not everybody, but we have extremely dedicated teachers who often feel like their hands are tied, that they don't have the resources that they need to meet the needs of their kids, and so they do the best they can with the resources that they have, but it's not enough. The system then incentivizes them to ensure that if their paperwork is filled in correctly, if their filing is beautiful, and if their exercise books have all of the information inside, then they get the tick marks, right? And and that's great. And so you're right in saying that there is a form over substance.
Wow.
And there is a sort of unwillingness to allow error and allow for failure in our system. And I think that, you went through the public school system where we are so charged on examination outcomes, right? And whether you get the right answer. And oftentimes a kid in a Malaysian school, their job is to receive everything that a teacher bestows upon them, memorize it, regurgitate it on an exam paper, and then just forget about everything afterwards, right? And when that becomes the focus of our education, we begin to lose the substance of it, because it's just about incentivizing for an exam outcome at the end of the day.
I think that Paulo Freire would have called that the banking model.
Exactly.
Of education, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Wow. Okay. I can imagine. I don't know right there, but that must have been tremendously frustrating for you. And here, I have something that you mentioned was a bit of a throwback right here. From the education blog of Tony Pua and Dr. Ong Kian Ming, Confession of a Teach for Malaysia Teacher. The Facebook status of Alina Amir. When was the last time you had read this?
Many years ago, but I think it's definitely something that I have not forgotten. I think in that confession, right, Alina talks about that sense of helplessness that I was talking about, right? And also how sort of this desire to do the best that she can, and oftentimes the system coming against her best efforts, right? And I think that that's oftentimes a lot around of what people do experience in any sort of very centralized bureaucracy, right? And hence why Teach for Malaysia's approach is really about how are we not just training our fellows to be the best possible teachers they can be, which is absolutely critical, but through the form of being a great educator, how do we develop somebody's leadership as well, right? And when we think about someone's leadership, it's really thinking about how do we help you to, dream about what you want to be possible for students, what you want to be possible for Malaysia, and then create the possibilities to get there, right? How do you figure out when your hands are so tied, innovation, solutions? How do you take calculated risks? How do you bring new things into the system that are going to support your students? Because sometimes the way things are aren't going to support your students, right? And so when there needs to be innovation, can you take a calculated risk to do that? Can you bring in the resources that you need? Can you leverage, influence others, find your way through? And so we believe that, you don't just need a great teacher, you also need teachers who are empowered as leaders to find the solutions that best meet their students' needs.
Well, thank you so much for that sharing. So, I'm understanding from what you're telling me here that, well, it's not just about teaching, but it's also about developing capability, really. And I have heard anecdotally, like stories of people who are or have been part of TFM, or even people who are part of like the larger Teach for All project that was started essentially by Wendy Kopp many years ago, and for which she has received countless honorary doctorates. You see essentially people also go on to all kinds of different, I guess, like prominent positions here, whether in like say education, corporate and stuff of that nature right there. But can you tell me maybe a story of what you found to be some of the most, I guess, inspiring individual things that maybe some of the people who have been through your fellowship program have ended up doing?
At the risk of like repeating similar stories again and again, but I mean these people are like exceptional, just exceptional leaders. I think that one of the reasons why we focus on leadership development is we believe that there's not one kind of single solution that's going to solve these challenges of education inequity in Malaysia. And we believe that the part that we can play is to equip people with an on-the-ground experience in some of the most challenging environments, right? And through that first-hand experience, they're going to figure out like what are some of the biggest problems, but also figure out what are some of the solutions. And then we want people to then go on beyond their 2-year experience, whether they choose to remain in the classroom or to go beyond the formal Ministry of Education, to then continue to innovate and lead solutions that will address a specific part, right, of the big puzzle pieces that we think it's going to take to really shift the outcomes for all kids. So we spoke about Alina. Alina, in her fellowship experience, she was mobilizing like literally hundreds of students themselves and volunteers to come and provide additional support for kids. She lived in the same community, the low-cost flats where her kids were staying, and she convinced the community to allow her to use the Dewan at night, and then kids would just come and tutor one another, right?
Wow.
Beyond then the fellowship, she and 3 other co-founders founded ARUS, and ARUS is an organization that really works on different types of literacies that empower students for the future. So they first started off thinking about like maker education, thinking about STEM, but they also now focus on media literacy, they focus on financial literacy, and they also run a school for stateless kids in Chowkit. And so they're doing all sorts of things, right? But they have then, from their fellowship, grown to run a social enterprise that they've started and that has sustained over the years since 2015, and are involved in so many things that are shaping education today. So Alina and her team, they are in the curriculum review for the 2027 curriculum, for example. Another person is Cheryl Fernando. Cheryl, she was the inspiration for a movie called Adiwiraku. Have you heard of it? Have you watched Adiwiraku?
I have heard of the name, but I did not watch the movie.
Okay, so on Netflix it's called My Superheroes, and it's still available on Netflix. And basically it was a story of how she supported her kids who came from this rural school, a non-English speaking background, to participate in a district choral speaking competition, and how that experience, they didn't win the competition, but that experience totally changed their outlook on life. And the kids were, a lot of the kids were her actual kids that acted in the movie, and that movie won the 2017 Best Malaysian Film award. Since then, Cheryl then went on to found an organization called Pemimpin GSL. And she realized that there were so many principals in schools that were hungry for the kind of support and leadership development that will enable them to really fulfill their potential as a school leader. Oftentimes, a teacher's effectiveness in the classroom can be either enabled and enhanced or hindered by just the beliefs, ways in which their principals operate. So Cheryl started an organization that has worked with hundreds of school principals now across the country, helping them to get better at their job and living into their leadership aspirations. And she's now passed that on to another bunch of Teach for Malaysia alumni, and she currently works at Teach for All. So I think wanted to kind of share sort of two examples of, you know, in Alina's case, they're continuing to work kind of directly with kids, right? And helping kids to find their spark, helping kids to figure out how they navigate the world, right? And in Cheryl's case, she's gone on to think about something very different, right? And thinking about sort of an area in the system that would benefit from support. And basically, we want to see our alumni go off to do very, very different things across the education ecosystem and to spark innovation at very, very different levels of the system. And so those are two examples of some things that our alumni are doing, but many, many more that I could share. But then you will run out of battery.
You essentially do have to have a level of extraordinary achievement, if I'm understanding correctly, in order to get essentially a TFM or TFA or otherwise fellowship. Is that not correct?
Yeah, so like I said, we're looking for the most promising but also diverse group of people to come in and lead solutions in education, right? And I think sometimes when we think about extraordinary, we have certain archetypes of what extraordinary means, right? And sometimes to us that may mean, you know, someone coming from an Ivy League university or from Oxbridge and joining the fellowship. But on the flip side of that, that may mean somebody who is also a first-generation university grad from a rural community in Sabah, in Malaysia as well, right? And so when we think about extraordinary, absolutely, we're looking for the extraordinary, but we're looking for that in a very diverse way. When people apply to the Teach for Malaysia Fellowship, it is a rigorous process. There are all these essays that they have to fill in, and they go through a number of rounds of selection to get through. And typically, we offer less than 10% of the people who do apply to the fellowship. And that's because we're looking for people who have sort of demonstrated leadership experience in their life. But also who have sort of the values and drive that are aligned to the vision and mission of Teach for Malaysia. So trying to find that kind of combination between people. And I think the thing that we are just very pleasantly surprised at is that every year there are young people, there are young Malaysians who could really do anything they want to do with their lives, who say, hey, we're going to make this commitment to do 2 years in a high-need school, and every year they turn up. And the question that we're asking ourselves is really, how do we see so many more Malaysians doing this? And I think that there's so much more space for young Malaysians to contribute in the education space.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you for that. One, I guess, like, common conception of, for example, Teach for Malaysia, Teach for All in general, might be that, okay, so you have tremendously promising individuals essentially go in and then start teaching right there. They're highly talented, but are they really qualified in the specific way that, for example, the education ministry would want them to be if they were formal teachers right there? I don't want to say like real teachers, because like there are, well, very real, shall we say, like teacherly characteristics within each one of us right there, even if you're not a formal teacher in a sense, right? But I guess, would you share with me how, I guess, like Teach for Malaysia works with, for example, like the Ministry of Education, and how it kind of, well, goes around, I guess, like the formal, education ministry like directives in this country?
Yeah. So Teach for Malaysia works really closely with the Ministry of Education. We work through the public school system, and we would not be able to work in the public school system without collaborating with the Ministry of Education. So typically, a Teach for Malaysia fellow receives a lot of support from different collaborators. So Teach for Malaysia will recruit and select our fellows, and then throughout the 2 years provide training and ongoing support throughout the 2 years. So when someone receives an offer from Teach for Malaysia, they're invited to our pre-service program, which is sort of like teacher leadership boot camp, where you're together with your entire cohort for 7 weeks, living together, eating, sleeping, breathing, how to be the best possible teacher and leader for your students that you can be. And so that's really to help fellows kind of get up to speed on all of the basics that they need to be able to make an impact on day one when they enter school. But we recognize that that's just the beginning of their journey. So then during the 2 years, our fellows are continuing to receive training and support throughout the 2 years, and often sit for a postgraduate diploma in education while they are in the fellowship. So there are coaches that Teach from Malaysia will provide to our fellows, and then there's also the supports that they get in school. So currently, the ways that people can apply to be a fellow is either as a teaching partner. And so a teaching partner is a Teach for Malaysia fellow that is paired with a host teacher in the school. So that host teacher will also be providing support with the fellow, providing guidance, making sure that the fellow is able to just do things according to expectation, right? The other way that we receive fellows is we actually recruit MOE trained teachers who are novice teachers in their first 2 years of teaching and are hungry for kind of the support, community, and the kind of ongoing opportunities that they would receive as a part of the fellowship program. So those are already MOE trained teachers. But for our fellows who come outside, who don't come from an education background, there's a lot of training and support they receive that we do in collaboration with the Ministry of Education. So Ministry approves all of our programs, approves all of our training in order for our fellows to make sure that they're adding value to the school system.
Wonderful. Okay, cool. And when you kind of like think about the existing collaborations right here, what might be some, what we call aspirational wishes on your part right there for, I guess, like the future? When you think about some of those like collaborations right here, I mean, like part of why I kind of like asked this right here is that, well, you've mentioned to me that essentially Malaysia has tremendously talented teachers, and I don't disbelieve that. In fact, I completely believe also that we have one of the very best education blueprints in the world, and many people working in concert to essentially, actualize that. But then the Prime Minister recently said that, perhaps we should import English teachers from Singapore right there. I can see like actually, yeah, what do you think about that?
He clarified to say that they would be volunteers and that they would go to rural parts of the country. And I think that the good thing about that is that there's a recognition that we do need to enhance what's happening in our schools, right? Like I said, we do have some of the most dedicated and amazing teachers in the system. We also, to be very objective, have some teachers that are not great in the system as well, right? And we also have situations where there are just teachers that don't have the resources they need to be successful in the classroom, right? So I think recognizing that, we need to enhance the quality of our education system is really, really important. And I guess this sort of initiative or this effort recognizes that, right? And wherever we can get help, let's get the help. If Singapore's going to pay for them to be volunteers in Malaysia, sure. There's obviously the question about whether they're going to be successful in our system, right? Because they're trained for their system. They have a certain way of operating in Singapore that will be very, very different to how we operate here. And they may feel their hands tied and frustrated with limitations and context that they may not understand, right? That aside, I think what we then need to think about is how, in addition to getting all the help that we can get, how do we activate our most promising young people, right, to get passionate about education and to make a difference where they're needed the most, right?
Join Teach for Malaysia.
So join Teach for Malaysia, and then so to all sort of like the young people out there, people graduating from university, or young professionals who are uninspired by their careers and looking to make a shift, or searching for something that's more aligned to their values. Join Teach for Malaysia. But also, that we would then say, we think about our partnership with the ministry and with the government, how do we actually sustain and scale the efforts of Teach for Malaysia? To your question about aspiration, right? I think that, Teach for Malaysia has been around for more than 10 years now. And I think that in our first 10 years, we're just really proud of the impact that our fellows and alumni have made over the years, right? But over those years, we've kind of been able to reach kind of a steady state of a certain number of people that we could recruit into the fellowship, which was typically around 50. Sometimes it went lower than that, but we never really exceeded like the 100 fellow a year mark. And I think that as we think about how we move forward, the question that we're asking is, what is it going to take, right? What mass of leadership, what kind of critical mass will it take if we really want to see outcomes shift for all kids in Malaysia? And so then the question we're asking ourselves is, what does it take for us to scale the way that we support the education system, right? So how do we, enlist more and more of our most promising and diverse young people to come into the fellowship? How do we, ensure that we're able to scale the funding that we need to place these people in schools? How do we ensure that we're able to scale the support from the government to sustain our efforts to expand the work that we do? Are all the kind of big questions that we ask ourselves.
Then let's quantify that. So then, if you were to provide, cohort numbers and in no uncertain terms, like the impact that Teach for Malaysia has made so far, and beyond essentially like the other qualitative things that you guys have done in creating a culture of transformation and also impacting individual lives. What are some things that you would quantify when you think about the impact of Teach for Malaysia?
So our fellowship program, which is our flagship core program, has had 516 fellows and alumni either complete or are currently doing that program. So they collectively have impacted about just under 200,000 students through the fellowship program, right? If you think about the numbers of students in a classroom alone, right? And then some of their initiatives go beyond their formal number of listed students in the classroom. So let's say just under 200,000 students. We have another program that we run for Yayasan Petronas, which works with STEM teachers in every single district in the country. And that program has seen over 1,000 teachers either complete or are currently in that program. More than double the amount of fellows we've had, and therefore more than double the amount of students that our fellows have impacted. Beyond our Duta Gurus, the STEM teachers that we work with, we also work directly in mobilizing our students as leaders, and we also work directly to mobilize community leaders to lead education solutions in their communities, as well as a whole chunk of volunteers that come alongside all of these people. So if we count our fellows, our Duta Gurus, our student leaders, our community leaders, and our volunteers, to date that brings us to, I don't have the specific number off the top of my head, but it's over 3,300 leaders in the movement. And we're very proud of all of those people, every single one of them. But when we think about the scale that we need to really shift things in the system, Malaysia has a population of 34 million people, right? We have an education system with 5 million kids in it. So 200,000 to 5 million, or even 500,000 to 5 million is still a drop in the ocean, really. We have a system of 412,000 teachers, or is it 16? It changes, right? But 400,000 plus teachers. So working with under 2,000 teachers specifically is a
drop in the ocean,
in that massive ocean, right? And while we believe in the power of the butterfly effects, right, and the ripple effects, and we think that those that there is great power in those things. We believe that in our lifetimes, if we want to feel like we're on a path to change, that we've just got to scale that number of people. Hence why you were reading out earlier, we have this very, very audacious ambition of figuring out how we're getting to 30,000 leaders by 2030. Our kind of hypothesis is if we have 30,000 leaders who are able to influence at least 100 people in their lives to take action, that gets us to about 3 million people in Malaysia taking action towards a more equitable education for kids in the country. Maybe that will give us enough critical mass to tip the balance of where the system is heading.
Critical mass, that is so interesting to think about. And I had an interesting quote. Remember how I repeated my drop in the ocean right there? The very final lines of Cloud Atlas. And for what? For what? No matter what you do, it will never amount to anything but a single drop in a limitless ocean. Towards which the main character basically replies by saying, what is an ocean but a multitude of drops? I find that a tremendously compelling goal, vision, aspiration to have right there. And I hope that you will get your wish. I'm sure that anybody who watches, that passion that you brought into this right here will share that wish. And so here's to 30,000 leaders as well.
Amazing. Yeah.
Wow.
What are we but drops in the ocean?
Sounds like you're going to rewatch that movie. Well, as we come towards the end of this interview, I guess, will you share what you believe would be some of your wishes for Malaysia that you hope will be accomplished, either during your current lifetime or during the next several that may come?
Malaysia is just such a special country, and there's nothing like Malaysia in the world, right? In my opinion. But I also think that we're a land of a lot of unfulfilled potential. I think that when we think about whether it's our natural resource, whether it's our human resource, I think that there's just so much more that we can dream of. And that we can live into, right? And so ultimately, like I said, right, like our vision and the thing that's close to my heart is like, how do we enable people just to live lives that they truly love? And in order for us to live lives that we truly love, we need a society which enables everybody, no matter their background, whatever their belief system, right? I think we can figure out how we come together to be the kind of society that includes everybody and enables people to live into their potential. And if we can enable that, right, and allow people just to have the agency and develop the agency to lead their own lives and ultimately lead the future of Malaysia, I think those are the hopes that we have, right? And so when I think about some of the things that give me some of the greatest hope, I think since our 2022 cohort, we have had students that were taught by Teach for Malaysia fellows now become teachers themselves. And these were students that had a fellow that made an impact on their life and were inspired to then pay that forward, right? And do something for other students, right? Who come from a background like they might have experienced, right? And they now want to feel like they have the agency and the opportunity to make a difference in the thing that they're passionate about, right? And so we just want to see more of that, right? Kids who feel like they can discover their passion and then not only discover it, but live into it, right? And if we can all live into the things that we truly care about, and be a society that allows us to be included in that includes all of the unique talents, the unique perspectives, the unique passions that we all have. I think that, that's the kind of Malaysia that I hope for and want to see.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Join Teach for Malaysia. Ladies and gentlemen, Pathways, Teach for Malaysia CEO, Chan Soon Seng. Soon Seng, thank you so much. And
thanks, Victor.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Join Teach for Malaysia.